It is now 12:03, and I know some people are still trickling in, but we're just going to go ahead and go over the agenda for today. First of all, thank you so much for being here during your lunch, especially the day before Halloween. We're really excited about this presentation and excited that we have a great turnout. But welcome to the New York City Independent Budget Office's School Budget Workshop. We're going to talk through the agenda first of all. So first, we are going to give a brief overview of IBO, who we are, what we do, how we fit into the city budget process. Then I'm going to hand it over to Emma. Emma is going to talk about the city budget timeline and then also mention a few key dates in there in which school budgets are released. And then we're going to go over into the meat of our presentation, which is the budget scavenger hunt, where we'll talk about school budgets, which is why you're all here, to learn about your individual school budgets. We'll give you a couple examples of how to pull up your own school budget and really understand where the money for your school is coming from, as well as what it can be used for. And then in the last 20 to 30 minutes, we are going to go into breakout rooms. We're going to split into two groups, and this is a good opportunity for you to practice the information that we went over as a group, ask us any questions about your school's budget or about the education budget in New York City, and just chat and get to know everybody. So without further ado, let's just start with the people that are staffing today's workshop. So my name is Hannah. I am a community engagement specialist at IBO. I do a lot of work with the education team in particular, doing these types of presentations to community groups and just getting our work out there. A little bit about me. I was previously a middle school teacher in New York City and have a really big passion for education and kids. So thank you again for being here. I'm going to hand it off to Youngwon, and he's going to talk a little bit about himself, just so we can get to know you all as well. So Youngwon, do you want to intro yourself?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Youngwon Song. The lead budget and policy analyst in education team. I'm now in the third year in IBO. Before joining IBO, I finished my PhD, and I focused on the education finance and policy, especially in New York City. So my expertise in the school budget and finance reform and some education policy. Nice to meet you. And pass to Emma.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Hi, everyone. My name's Emma Gossett, and I am also a lead budget and policy analyst. Youngwon and I started about a week apart, so we've been at IBO around the same amount of time, and excited to speak with all of you today.
Perfect. So let's just review some of, whoops, sorry. I'm just going to go over quickly the workshop goals that we have for you all. So first of all, we are going to, like I said, just go over the city budget. We're going to just really briefly explain the timeline of the city budget process, talk about some of the dates in which school funding fits in, just so you have a broader picture of how that process works. Then we're going to go over a mock school budget so that you can pull up your own school budget alongside of our examples. And this exercise is really to show you how funding is allocated to your school and how it can be used. We're hoping that you can use this information if you're a parent, if you're an education advocate, if you're just a really interested community member, to understand how budget decisions for schools can connect to student needs and priorities within the school process. Lastly, our budget scavenger hunt is going to hopefully give you some practice pulling up your own school budget while we demonstrate. And then we're hoping you can use the information that you learned today to have stronger discussions within your family, between community members, and then also within your school as well. So really briefly, I'm just going to talk about who we are as an organization. For many of you today, this might be your first touch point with us, but we are the New York City Independent Budget Office. We are a smaller city agency, so we have around 50 analysts on staff, and we are nonpartisan, meaning that we do not report to the city mayor, and we offer nonpartisan and independent data-driven fiscal and policy insights into how New York City's government and services operate. And more plainly, we also are here to serve as an educational resource to people that are interested in engaging more with the city budget or learning more about that process. So just to highlight some of the work that we do, I'm just going to touch on some of the work that may be interesting to the people in this presentation. But besides our 3 charter mandated reports, we also put out reports throughout the year, focusing on really just a broad range of topics regarding the city budget. So here we have our education team that does a lot of work around the DOE budget. We also have teams that look at housing, healthcare, city agency staffing, and more. And more recently, we're also working on a series on federal changes. I know that's something that's coming up a lot in conversations, talking about how changes at the federal level are going to affect New York City and New York City programs and services. And so if that's something that you're interested in, please feel free to follow up with later. We also conduct testimony at City Council, and most importantly, probably for you all, we really serve as a general educational resource for anyone that is wanting to learn more about the city budget or get more involved in your community and wants kind of the data and the budget background to do so. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Emma, and she's going to talk about some of the work that we do as well as go over that city budget timeline.
Thanks so much, Hannah. Perfect. So we're going to start right now with one of our recent reports that was put out on school buildings. And so this is just an example of one of the charts that is in that report. This chart specifically is looking at the accessibility of school buildings themselves. And just to walk you through the chart just a little bit, on the left-hand side, it lists out the school districts. So that's geographic school districts 1 through 32. And then on the bottom is that percentage of the buildings within that district that are accessible. And then on that top, you can see what the different colors mean. So all the way on the right is that green bar, which means that those schools are fully accessible. For example, in District 30, about 50% of buildings are fully accessible. That's an example of that. And we break it out by borough as well, to make it just a little bit more readable. Another 2 charts from that same report are about AC access. So that was another part of this, another report that we've done on school buildings. And the AC access report found that about, though most buildings lack central AC, majority of space in school buildings have it. And so we can see that on the right pie chart, 67% of square footage has AC. And then that right chart, the bar chart, is the buildings, again, districts on the bottom, geographic district, and we break it again by borough, and we give the AC access by area. That's just another example. Another recent report, this one was actually my report, looked at pre-K and 3K enrollment and capacity. And we looked at the percentage of fill within each district. So we do a lot of different research. We do school buildings, 3K, pre-K, financial aid, or sorry, not financial aid, school budgeting amounts. The foundation aid is the word I was looking for. And then, perfect, thanks, Henry. She put that link in the chat. And then we also do involvement throughout the year with budget, and we involve community members as well. So in the call that you're in right now, School Budget Workshop, we offer some support on learning about your school budgets. But we also have a series of videos called Demystifying School Budgets that really helps you walk through all of these various things that we're going to talk through in a little bit more detail today. So just a little bit of a brief overview. This is the New York City budget timeline. And in yellow are some key points within the fiscal year for schools specifically. So in January, there are 4 budgets released. January is the preliminary budget. That's the start of the calendar year. But the adopted budget, as you can see, is out here in the summer. But in terms of school specifics, school allocation memorandums, also known as SAMs, are released in May and June, and that provides projected numbers for principals to plan out their school budgets. And once the fiscal year starts, this one down here, principals plan for the new year with input from SLTs and other school budget people like stakeholders. So those are some key dates for stakeholders to know, like when input is really valuable and when they can make the most impact. And then in September, school year starts, and October 31st is where the updates based on real enrollment numbers are made, and that's where a lot of the DOE's demographic data comes from. So that demographic snapshot, and that's where a lot of our data comes from as well, as that October 31st deadline or date. A little bit about funding and the different places that funding comes from. So 6% of the DOE's fiscal year 2025 budget was made up of federal funding. That is mostly targeted support for low-income students, including Title I, the IDEA for students with disabilities, and there are some funds that go directly to the DOE, but there are also some funds that go through the state first. State funds make up about 36% of the budget, and those primarily come from foundation aid, which is the primary allocation of funds to school districts in New York, and that's based on that foundation aid formula, which we'll talk a little bit more about later in this presentation. And then finally, 58% of the New York City DOE budget was city funds, and that covers the largest share, and it covers staff, programs, and operations. Over time, this is looking at, since 1990, the share of DOE total spending based on where that money is coming from. So as you can see, that top bar is city spending, and it has gone like up and down, and it merged a little bit with states in 1996, 1995. But as you can see, since about 2012, it has made up more at or above 50% of the total budget. You can see that spike. One thing I'm going to note is that spike in federal spending in the 2022, and that was that COVID aid. And you can see a similar decrease in city spending at that time. Okay, and this is the funding flow chart. So the overall budget of the New York City Department of Education, there's a number of different numbers that get thrown around, and that has to do with what it's accounting for. So some account for fringe benefits, some don't. The number we're using right now is 33.5 billion for the total. Those are allocated in units of appropriation, which is what is the most publicly available, broken down form of the New York City budget. And then that allocates to the DOE. An example is general instruction and school leadership. That's a really broad category, but that is one of the U of A's that the DOE uses. Another example would be early childhood has a couple different ones. So there's a pre-K, 3K, there's an early ed for contracted childcare. And then school allocation memorandum, which I mentioned, the SAMs, that is used by the central DOE to explain how funds are distributed to individual schools and also are how principals plan their budgets. The DOE budget is broken down into several categories. So on the left, you can see that pie chart. This is directly from the New York City DOE. 16 billion went to K through 12 school and instruction, 7.8 to benefits and pension. And our presentation today will focus on the funding to individual schools. So we're not really going to focus on the bigger picture. We're going to focus on like, what is the school picture? And we'll walk you again through how to find your own school budget.
All right, so this again is going to be kind of the bulk of our presentation. There are also a couple portions of this portion where we are going to be sending links in the chat so that you can follow along and try pulling up your own school budget. But we also, if you're having trouble with that, please feel free to drop in the chat if you need help. We also have people on support staff today that will help you if you have any questions. But the goal of this activity is, number one, to see how much money your school gets each year and where it's coming from. So like Emma mentioned before, your school budget is coming from lots of different sources. It's coming from city sources, like property taxes, it's coming from state sources, and then it's also coming from federal sources for those programs like Title I or special education funding. And all those sources are sometimes limited. So certain funding can only be used in restricted ways by your principal. And so we'll try to give you a couple examples of those types of restricted funding so that you can really understand not just how much money your school is getting, but what it can be used for as well. So that leads me to number 2. You are going to be going over a couple examples of the guidance that the Department of Education gives to principals on how money can be spent and what choices schools can make by reading these documents called school allocation memorandums. So we're really not expecting everyone to walk away being experts in reading these documents, but we wanted to highlight a couple of examples of some of the constraints that your principal might be working with when receiving their budget for the next school year. Lastly, we're also going to show you a helpful publicly available tool that looks at how your school is actually spending its money. So we're going to show you information again on how you can pull up your school spending for the last year and see exactly where the money was going. So how much money is going to pay for teachers, how much money is going to be paying for certain programs and supplies, and other information as well. So just to clarify and give a really high level overview of school budgets, for most schools, the majority of funding, and Young One's going to get into some more detailed information on exactly how much funding is coming from the source, but the bulk of funding for most schools is coming from a source called Fair Student Funding. So maybe at this point, drop in the chat if you ever have heard of Fair Student Funding. Maybe not, but Fair Student Funding is a formula. The DOE loves its formulas that takes into account a lot of different student needs in order to distribute funds to schools. So the really important thing about Fair Student Funding is that it is a per pupil funding formula. So the money from Fair Student Funding is going to follow students around based on what school they enroll in. This is another reason why we talk about enrollment being so important at schools, because the school budget is really dependent on how many students enroll in their school, as well as what the needs of those students are. And again, Young Won is going to get into more detail with Fair Student Funding in a couple slides, but just to give you a high-level picture, this is how schools are receiving a majority of funding. And when principals get money through Fair Student Funding, they have a little more flexibility in how they can use it. So principals, with the input of school leadership teams and parents, get to have a little more independence in how to spend these funds. And Karma is exactly right. This funding formula does take into account a lot of different student needs. And so we'll talk about exactly what those needs are in a couple slides. So we just talked about Fair Student Funding. The other portion of school funding is coming from something called categorical grant funds. These categorical grant funds, we'll give a couple examples of these as well, are for things like Title I or for IDEA, and they are meant to be used for specific purposes. So we'll go over a couple examples of what those purposes are in the next couple slides. But once your principal receives funding from these other sources, they're going to be a little bit more restricted in how they can use them. And the answers to what your principal can spend money on are listed out in school allocation memorandums. So again, we'll go over a couple examples, but just to give you a really generalized breakdown, Fair Student Funding, a little more flexible. Your principal has a little more autonomy in how they can use these funds. The other sources, categorical grant funds, are a little more restricted. So they have to be used for certain purposes or for certain students within the school. That brings me to the first resource that we are going to be highlighting today. It is called School Budget at a Glance. So this is a publicly available document. Sunray is going to be dropping the link in the chat. But this document is just going to give you a really high level picture of what your school budget looks like, as well as how much is being spent for each student within that school. We're actually not going to be focusing that much on this document though, because we're going to show you even a more granular resource that you can use. But the reason that we do also like Budget at a Glance is that it does give you a good breakdown of a couple different things. So number one, it'll show you how much funding is allocated per student for your school. For this school, for PS 188, for example, each student is allocated around $36,000. And this document is also going to tell you that's a good amount higher than most public schools in New York City. It's around 59% higher. And then these demographic data points below are going to explain to you a general sense of why the school's budget might be higher. And if we could see, I know the font is really tiny, but we can see here that PS 188 is a school with a pretty significant economic needs index. So students in this school, there's around 95% of them that qualify for economic need. And so this school might be getting more funding to support those specific students. They also have a really significant share of students with disabilities. So they have a 32% enrollment rate of students with disabilities. And then they have a 24% English language learner percentage as well, which might explain why their funding is a little bit higher than the citywide average. So again, we're not going to focus too much on this document because we're going to show you an even better even more detailed document to look at. But if you're just looking for kind of a high level overview of your school as well as some of the demographic data, this is a pretty helpful resource to dip your toes into. Before we pull up different documents, we're also going to go over a couple key terms that we're going to be exploring and using within this presentation. So number one is school allocation memorandum. So I know this is a term that we've been throwing around a little bit in this presentation, but a school allocation memorandum is basically just a document that is publicly available. And this document is going to explain how and why money is allocated to schools. And so Thinray is going to drop into the chat the full list of school allocation memorandums, but they are a lot of them. So I think right now there's around 80 of them. So again, we're not expecting you to read all these documents, but we just want to give you a little bit of a primer on one or two or three of them so that you can just get a sense of what your principal is working with in managing the budget. So again, each one of these SAMs is going to explain why your school is getting certain funds and then also what these funds can be used for. That is SAMs. We're going to be using that term pretty frequently, but the next term that we're going to go over is Galaxy. So some of you might have already heard about Galaxy if you are on a SLT or a school leadership team, or if you've talked with your principal about the budget before. But Galaxy is just the school budget system that the DOE uses to manage its budget and to post all these publicly available documents. And so the website that we're going to be navigating today is called the Galaxy website. And again, it's just the New York City DOE's school budget system. Lastly, another term that might come up within these documents is TL or CTL. We also love to use acronyms. And TL just stands for tax levy. So anytime you see TL on a document, that is just your key that money for your school is coming in through New York City tax revenue. So just another thing to break down before we get into our examples. But for now, I'm going to pass it over to Youngwon so he can demonstrate using one school while you practice pulling up your own school budget.
All right. Thank you, Hannah, and thank you, Emma. So I'm going to start with about the Galaxy location page. So please, I suggest you can scan this QR code, or you can click the link. Then you can see the website that is the Galaxy allocation page, and then you can see the blank. Then you can put the school name. I'm gonna explain more, but before explaining that, so the Galaxy allocation page shows how much money each school get and what that's for. So from this slide, I'm gonna use an example school that is M188. So you can put your school number on that web page, then you can see the full list of that Galaxy allocation list. And then you can see the grand total. So you can think this Galaxy allocation page and the list is kind of revenue side of the school. So what kind of program or funding source your school received, that table shows that. For example, yes, here. So each line is the program name, like Fair Student Funding, Title I, or summarizing. And also next to it is amount of money the school received for that program. And also each of these are explained in a school allocation memorandum. So in the previous slide, another link, then you can go to the SAMs. You can find the SAMs by the numbers. So once you open this Galaxy allocation page, so if you have some question about what is this specific line, then you can go to that SAMs page, that the same document explain really detail about each allocation category. Okay, and then next slide. So as I mentioned, when you look up your school, then you can use the 4-digit code. So here you can see these are the identification number. So first 2-digit is a district, and then X is the borough, and then the last 3 is the number of the school number. So when you look, when you want to find your school in the Galaxy allocation page, you can use the 4-digit, then you can find your school. Okay. And as Hannah said, each school, the one of the largest portion of the school, the tax levy supported the amount of the budget from the Fair Student Funding. That's a SAN number 1. So the largest portion of the school funding, and also school principal can use this money at their discretion compared to the other categorical program. So principal can use that money for their school's specific needs. And also, this Fair Student Funding provide base funding for all students and additional fund for student needs on a per pupil base. So today, we're not gonna show that complicated the full formula, but the formula has about over 40 factors. So number of general education students, special education, or English language learner, something like that. So all factors reflect that. Yes, okay, thank you, Hannah. So this is grade level and academic intervention, special education, and the student portfolio school, that's for high school, the career and technology, some or specialization, specialized the schools. Okay, then I'm going to talk more the new weight later, and then go back to the slide. Okay, so all across all schools, the base weight, the weight number one means the amount of 4,262 per pupil in the fiscal year to 2026. The current year, so suppose if one student, the student doesn't have any other education need, he is not from the poor family or English language learner, so without any needs, then means the DOE invest about $4,000 for that student. So from that base amount, so the Fair Student Funding formula added more additional money for that student if that student has some needs. And also these weights for each year are presented to and voted on by the panel for education policy meeting. So those weights can be changed by their decision. Not that frequently, but yes, the DOE tried to update the formula along with the population change and or additional need. This is the example. So currently, the 2025, for the 2024 fiscal year, Federal student funding added two new weight. Number one is the temporary student in the temporary housing. Number two, DOE started adding more extra money for they call that the needs concentrated schools. So based upon all other educational need factors, if some schools really have more students with educational needs, then they can get more additional money because of this new weight. So for students in temporary housing, that is additional weight is 0.12, and is average the school budget increased by $32,000, and that is equivalent to the $78 per pupil. And the funding through the concentrated need weight, so that is about 304 schools, increased budget by $95,000 on average. And also this weight make the three tiers. So the different weight by the tiers. So here is the example, the per pupil base, $169, $339, and $508 per pupil by that different tiers. And yes, so as Hannah now, the point highlighted is students in temporary housing and students in high need schools. There is a new additional weight they recently added in that Fair Student Funding formula. Okay. All right. And then if you are now on your school Galaxy allocation page, or in the later you can find, there is another allocation items that is named the Contract for Excellence. That is SAM number 5. This fund target the high need schools and students and must be used for the class size reduction and student time on task, teacher quality initiative, program for multilingual learner, and middle and high school restructuring and full day pre-K programs. For example, the time on task, what that means, so the time on task, that is, this money can be used for additional instructional time for a student. So principal can use the C4E, we call it C4E fund for additional time for specific students. And this funding from the New York State Foundation Aid, and also that the New York State Aid mandate that 75% of the city's total C4E funding be allocated to the top 50% of the city's high need schools. Okay. And the next slide shows another example and the Galaxy allocation that is named summarizing. As this table shows, there is the Galaxy allocation items with summer light rising. And also you can see that item start with TL. That means almost these programs funding from city tax levy. So this summarizing allocation funds to school for the K-8 summarizing program, high school summer course credit recovery, and other summer opportunities. So school leaders in charge of summer sites receive funding based on the number of available slots, and also based on the number of students historically mandated for summer school. And this program also funded by cities tax levy or Title III from the federal money. Okay, and then the next example is Title I, the same number 11. So Title I is one of the representative program or funding source from the federal government. So many people can hear about this Title I. So this Title I federal money funds support schools with a high number of low-income students, providing resources for counseling, parent engagement, and more. And these funds also give both Title I and non-Title I schools from full per pupil location students in temporary housing. So for that purpose, the principal can use this money for something supply, and then so some supplies for those particular students. Okay, and when you go back to the table of the SAMs by the number, then within that SAM Title I SAM document, the DOE make this kind of the descriptive summary table. So beyond your school, you can see the number on average, or yes, citywide and by the borough, Manhattan, Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, how much public school to get this Title I. So if you wanna compare, or if you wanna know that this the more aggregated amount, then you can see, you can find that within that the same document. All right. This is new SAM, the SAM number 31 for the fiscal year 2026. So that is class size reduction planning. I can expect many people have heard about the class size reduction in New York City because of that the state level reform, state level new law. They make some cap, the new caps. So until 2028, New York City's all schools classes and sections, they should comply with the state law. For example, the class size 20 for grade K to 3, 23 for 4 to 8, and 25 for high school classes. So this new additional funding from the state government, they can use, or city fund as well. So they can use this money mostly for hiring teachers. So in this current fiscal year, the DOE and also teacher union and other organization, they choose 750 schools with a new teacher need. So there are 750 schools with this additional funding, about 458 million citywide. And also this funding expected about 3,704 teachers newly hired for this class size reduction purpose. So in your Galaxy allocation table, you can see C4E class size something. That's all the funding source for reducing class size your school. And the second table that shows, you can find this table in the SAM document, SAM number 31 document. Within that document, you can also find the Excel table. Then you can see across all schools in the New York City. So for example, here, my example, the M188, these schools allocated for number of teachers, new teachers, 4. And related budget is $437,000 from this source. Okay, and then I'm gonna pass to Emma.
Thanks, Youngwon. So another example of a SAM is the pre-K and 3K SAM, and this funds general and special ed education, early childhood classrooms. This covers teachers, paraprofessionals, classroom materials, and startup costs, and they're funded through both New York City tax levy and state funds. And just a note that during the scale up, or the initial scale up of 3K, a lot of that funding was through the federal stimulus funds, and there are also separately some other federal grants, including Head Start, that at least in the past have been used through the DOE. Perfect. And this is Galaxy budget spending details. And so this is an example of what the Galaxy looks like. So in our example school, PS 188, you can see on the left hand by the staff, like the type of staff. So on the left, you can see the head of school, the assistant head of school, the dean, the parent coordinator, school secretary, the sub. And all of those have the number of positions on the right and the budget to the right of that. Importantly, that doesn't include only salary. That is not just like the base salary. That is a lot of other things. I think it includes fringe, but I'm not entirely sure. The classroom teachers on the right are also super helpful to just understand. It lists by the grade level and type of class and service. It gives you the number of positions and the budget for those positions. So for this school, for example, you can see for grade 8, they have one ICT teacher. And then for 7th grade, they also have an ICT teacher, and it looks like they have a bunch for, yeah, it really, you can just look through and it'll give you a lot of detail, which can be super helpful when you're thinking about what to advocate for, what to discuss with your leadership teams. So District 75 is the citywide special education program and schools. Those are through SAM 34, and the funds are distributed using a school-based budgeting process, which allows for principal autonomy when controlling funds and hiring, really based on student need. And they're built from the ground up based on student and population and IEP needs. And IEPs are individual education plans, if people aren't aware. Those are the plans that special education students get to really help shape how their education will be best supportive of them. And then these funds are distributed through different categories. That includes instructional programs for personnel services and other than personnel services and other specialized categories. And now we'll give you an example. So this is PS 094. And the Galaxy lists funds for D75 schools in a lump sum. So in the left-hand side, you can see TL, which again, tax levy, and then instructional programs. And that includes funding for salaries, for per session, and for per diem. And then on the right, you can see that schools receive funding for IEP mandated teachers, and you can see the tax levy speech. So that is that speech position and will be allocated to schools basically as needed. And again, it's based on student need, IEPs, population. Another interesting thing just about District 75 is that sometimes, as you can see here, there are multiple sites within a main site. So right now we're looking at M094 at M051. So you gotta, it gets a little bit more granular. And so you can check out the Galaxy budget summaries by campus. And so on the right, you can see there's a classroom teacher allocation of 8 positions. They have music, physical education, they have an occupation therapist and physical therapy needs, as well as some paraprofessionals in the bottom. And that really this just gives you a very detailed information on the staffing and the allocation for staffing. And it can also give you a sense of the student population, especially just because in D75, these really are based on student need and populations.
Yep. So hopefully you were following along for all of that. I know that this is really dense information, but we're now going to actually break